Well, thank you, General Flynn and Ellie. It's an honor, privilege to be your colleague. And I know that everyone in this room is very busy. You have lots of important things on your plates. And it is my job, our job here, to make your time here very worthwhile. And I think it is a wise investment because what we're going to be talking about today is actually very important, not just for the United States, but also for our allies and partners. We crafted this national security strategy, which each of you should have a copy of in your seat, because we live in really unprecedented times. And I know that many people say that, and it's almost a cliche, just to get sort of an audience's attention. And then they go into something which is actually not very remarkable, and they ask themselves, you know, why did that speaker say we live in unprecedented times, get my attention, get me excited, only to leave me deflated? I personally have too much respect for your time and too much respect for your intelligence to do that sort of bait and switch trick. And so I'll make my case for why we live in unprecedented times. There's actually really three reasons I'd like to address. The first one is the seriousness of our times. The Director of National Intelligence recently announced that the Trump administration has conclusive evidence, and I quote, of a treasonous conspiracy by officials at the highest levels of the Obama White House to subvert the will of the American people and try to usurp the president from fulfilling his mandate. The DNI went on. It's worse than even politicization of intelligence. It was manufactured intelligence that sought to achieve President Obama and his team's objectives, which was undermining the duly elected President of the United States and subverting the will of the American people. Now, as we speak here, the DNI is making criminal referrals to the U.S. Department of Justice, and what the DOJ does with that will remain to be seen. But I think it's important to dwell a little bit on this charge of treason, treasonous conspiracy, because it's a very serious charge. It's the only crime that is enumerated in the U.S. Constitution, only one, and it's treason. And treason means the willful act by citizens of a country to levy war against the government, or provide aid and comfort to our enemies. So both of these dual aspects of treason relate to hurting America and helping our enemies. It's a very serious charge. The national security strategy which you have before you lays out precisely this problem and why it exists. So I'm not going to get into the details of it. You know, we can read that at your leisure on your own. The second unusual aspect of our present era is just how unique this charge of treason is. In looking back at U.S. history, there are only two times in U.S. history that have even come close to this level of severity. One was in 1807 when Vice President Aaron Burr was tried for treason for plotting to urge some states to leave the Union. And another actually better known time was when a less senior official, but still a general, Benedict Arnold, a military officer, crossed the lines to join the British during the Revolutionary War. But this was a mere vice president and a mere general. What we're talking about today is the President of the United States, a sitting President of the United States, his Vice President, Hillary Clinton, the Democratic candidate for presidency, that president's spy chiefs, and many others. This is not only a level of seniority, which is much higher, but it is a conspiracy because it includes many very senior actors. So this is unusual. The third aspect of our moment, which I think is unprecedented, and I'm very happy that so many, and we'll get into the reasons why. what you're going to be seeing is a rare look beneath the surface of the swamp. You are going to be seeing something that only happens when there's a shock to the conscience. And a shock to the conscience, I'm a lawyer by background, that's a legal term, to shock the conscience. We are so distracted by our cell phones and the quotidian noise of our daily routines that so rarely do we have a moment like now that shocks the conscience, causes us to stand back and to peer deep, deep inside what possibly created the conditions for this treasonous conspiracy, the alleged treasonous conspiracy. It does not come out of a vacuum. It comes from somewhere. And we are going to be looking at that. This moment is going to shine a light on the slow-moving systemic rot and corruption that created the conditions for this egregious crime. That's what we are going to be seeing. Now, is that the infiltration of the United States by our enemies is rather extensive. This is being done to, frankly, do the bidding of our adversaries, and we lay out the reason why that is the case in our national security strategy. But I'll give you a taste of it here, and that is that for more than a century, Americans' adversaries have been trying to discover what is America's Achilles heel. America is a formidable nation. General Flynn was talking about how we are a third of global power and wealth and influence. And we're a confusing nation because we're so chaotic in many respects. That is, in some respects, the design of our republic is to be that way, because that's the self-correcting mechanisms of our constitutional order and practice. So our enemies have been trying to discover our Achilles heel. And in the process, they've encountered very sharp teeth, but they've also encountered what our soft underbelly is. Our sharp teeth, of course, were probably on greatest display during the Second World War, when Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan took us on, and we firebombed their cities and strategically bombed them, dropped nuclear weapons. That was a very harsh lesson not to take America on head-on. That's a mistake that our enemies have learned the hard way a few times in our history. Regarding America's soft underbelly, to our enemies' pleasant surprise, it's actually easier and frankly a lot cheaper to achieve strategic victory over America by taking an indirect approach. And that is, they have realized that America is unusually open. Our institutions, our government, our borders are very open to outside influence and, of course, subversion. A friend of mine, and a brilliant man, J. Michael Waller, wrote a book called Big Intel. I encourage you to read it. It spells out this history of how America's adversaries have infiltrated America from within. He traces it back to 1917 when a young Leon Trotsky arrived in New York City to spread revolutionary socialism and to pack crowds in Brooklyn and Manhattan. So for over 100 years, America's authoritarian adversaries have waged war to infiltrate us, either directly, but usually with fellow travelers, so that means Americans who do their bidding for them, and to undermine us from within. And once inside, they're delighted about how easy it is to buy influence. Every institution of strategic significance in the United States they discovered was corruptible. They've made great headway. And indeed, this is, if this shocks you, you haven't been paying attention. This theme of adversary corruption of American institutions is so prevalent that it's really not even newsworthy anymore. Nothing is shocking because the level of foreign subversion is so extreme. I'll just give you a few examples just from the past couple of weeks. Hamas and the Islamic Republic of Iran openly brag for many months, years now, that they have agents on all of our college campuses. and really nobody seems to care. Most of these Ivy League protests are funded and by foreign adversaries. I hope none of you have children going to these schools who are actually being the tools of America's enemies. There's a less polite term. It's useful idiots. Hopefully you're not plagued by that problem. My children are not quite yet. Even I'd say more shocking, as we've learned recently, that engineers in China have been maintaining the Pentagon's computers. Think about that. This is much more serious than is reported in the public, and that will come out over time. Another recent headline: 2 Chinese nationals arrested for spying on U.S. Navy personnel and bases. And the Department of Justice has recently charged Chinese nationals with smuggling potential agroterrorism fungus into the U.S. for their work at the University of Michigan laboratory. This was last month. One of those individuals was double dipping. She was getting paid by the People's Liberation Army and the U.S. government to wage agroterrorism against the United States. There you go, exactly, as General Flynn said. Yeah, very clever. And then, of course, there's the Russian role in Russiagate. This has not gotten as much attention as it should, but what we know from the Department of Justice Inspector General is that in the Steele dossier, Hillary's deep sources were Russian intelligence officers. They're the ones, after you go through all the cutouts, it goes back to Russia. And this is a disinformation coup that Russia has scored on the United States and is responsible, I believe, for this treasonous conspiracy charge, or at least it should be. And this is pervasive. There's an old saying that nothing succeeds like success. In 2022, the Washington Post summarized a U.S. intelligence assessment that found that after Putin had helped Obama win re-election to the White House, this was in 2012, a secret long-term strategy was hatched in the bowels of the Kremlin. Between 2014 and 2022, Moscow spent $300 million on operations that compromised foreign political parties and candidates for political office, and it, quote, planned to spend hundreds of millions more as part of a covert campaign to weaken democratic systems and promote global political forces that align with Kremlin interests, end quote. Our adversaries know what works, and this is their sharp tip of the spear. One reason our adversaries have done this is, of course, to steer U.S. foreign policy in a direction that hurts America but helps them. This is mostly Section 2 of our national security strategy on your seats. They do that, first of all, to take over America's most strategically significant institutions, to do their bidding for them. Their strategy was described succinctly by Whittaker Chambers in the 1950s, who observed that the power to influence policy has always been the ultimate purpose of the Communist Party's infiltration of America. It was much more dangerous and, as events have proved, much more difficult to detect than espionage, which beside it is trivial, though the two go hand in hand. Chambers wrote that in 1952 in his book Witness. But since that time, our authoritarian adversaries' strategies, tactics, techniques, and procedures have become much, much more sophisticated. The Director of National Intelligence treasonous conspiracy charge is emblematic of how a significant percentage of America's most senior leaders, including government and military officials, have adopted Beijing's and Moscow's strategic objectives for America as their own. Now, this level of convergence is unique because during the Cold War, it was mostly on the political left that you had advocates for our enemy's strategic objectives. Now we are witnessing something called the horseshoe theory in practice, and that is we have the woke left and we have the woke right mouthing the strategic objectives of America's enemies as their own and for America. What is my evidence for this? Well, it's in plain sight. I'll give you 3 examples. The first is this notion that America must pursue a balance of power in the world. A balance of power. Now think about that for a while. Balance of power sounds nice. It sounds equitable. It sounds balanced. It sounds harmless. But it's absurd. It's an absurd idea. And it's so absurd that it's included in our enemy's strategic documents as their objectives. 2 years after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1993, the Kremlin produced the foreign policy concept of the Russian Federation, which sought as its strategic objective a balance of influence in the world. That's their terms. And how was that done? After the collapse of the Soviet Union, America was an unrivaled superpower. Russia, our other adversaries, were significantly weaker. A balance of power in practice would mean America ceding its power to our enemies to create balance. Of course, that's what our enemies want. But there are so many U.S. officials who talk about the need for a balance of power in the world, who want to cede American primacy, cede American preeminence, cede U.S. military overmatch to our adversaries to create balance. All you have to do is pay attention and you'll hear it time and again. A second adversary strategic objective that is mouthed by many senior U.S. officials is the need for a multipolar world. A multipolar world is a variation of balance of power, but instead of the bipolar world of the Cold War or the unipolar world where the United States is the sole superpower, they seek to spread the power. Multipolar, that sounds nice. That's like a UN sort of, let's come together and hold hands version of the world that never works in practice. This was laid out in the 2000 national security concept of the Russian Federation signed by Vladimir Putin. And it's such an attractive view of the world, a rearrangement of power in the world, that it continues to this day. And like I said, nothing succeeds like success. So many American senior officials parrot these adversary objectives. A classified annex to the April 11, 2023 Russian foreign policy concept of the Russian Federation calls, yet again, for the West to realize that there is a lack of any benefit from a future confrontational policy and hegemonistic ambitions, and that the U.S. should accept the complicated realities of a multipolar world. Again and again and again. This has been going on for a long time. So it's this remarkable confluence of U.S. senior officials and our adversaries wanting the same thing. And of course, this is not relegated to the government itself. Many of our institutions pursue a diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. The equity part is balance of power, it's multipolar, it's part and parcel of the same cultural Marxist sort of woke agenda that, frankly, I would say, Putin and Xi Jinping and the mullahs in Iran, the ones that are left, are probably, they sort of laugh at us on a daily basis that we accept this stuff and take it as our own. And finally, there is this policy prescription that you increasingly hear about isolationism. Isolationism. Now, this is done in very bad faith. There are many people today in the United States, in the government, and also throughout our institutions, who are sort of just jumping into this conclusion that America must be isolationist. And the reason why this is bad faith is this: if indeed there was some real strategic purpose for isolationism, okay, let's hear it. But as we talked about last night, as General Flynn mentioned, as I spoke in my comments, America's strategy capacity, we no longer produce the precursors for our national security strategy called net assessments. This assessment would permit us to look at where is America relative to our adversaries and do we really have no choice but isolationism? Do we need to pull back? Do we need to balance power? Do we need to have this multipolar world? The analysis has not been done. So if you don't do the analysis and you immediately say we must surrender, which so many senior American officials are saying these days, or senior luminaries are saying, that shows bad faith to me. That, to me, shows just how corrupted, whether they're useful idiots or tools of our adversaries, I don't know. But it's bad faith. And we need to call them out on it. A classified addendum to the Russian foreign policy concept called for precisely this: for Russia to disrupt the domestic politics of the United States and European countries through propaganda campaigns supporting isolationist policies. So think about that for a while when you hear these talking heads talk about the need for America to be isolationist and cede our preeminence or overmatch or primacy. This goes on, and it's not relegated to the United States. It's relegated to many other countries as well. I am personally, heartened to see, however, that even though I don't think President Trump has all the best advisors, he himself recognizes the need for American preeminence, American primacy, and overmatch. I don't think this balance of power, multipolar world, or isolationist tendency has infected him, and thank God, because that would be a problem. I think he's wiser than that. Instead, he's adopted a policy of deterrence through peace through strength, which was a very sharp break from the Obama and Biden administrations, which genuinely did adopt the strategic objectives of Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran for their own. So we've been talking about treasonous conspiracy and U.S. officials, but there's really something deeper going on, and I'm not going to talk about it too much because it is in the national security strategy. But the reason, the purpose, the issue is, why are our enemies doing this? Why are our adversaries doing this? And frankly, it's because they're scared. They're scared because they know they're failing. The Russians know they're failing. The Chinese know they're failing. I'm not one of these people to say that to downplay the threat they pose to the United States. They do pose a very severe threat to the United States, in part because they're failing. But they know that they're rotten from within, and that their only hope is they can't reform, because they know that. They don't have the flexibility for that. Their only hope is to tear America down. And the reason why they want to do that is not for external purposes, but for internal purposes. Their greatest fear are their own people. They don't fear the United States. They don't fear other countries. They fear their own people. And they fear their own people because their people look to America as a beacon of hope. They see our imperfect republic as what they want. They want the freedoms that we in this room have to criticize our government. They want this more than anything, and they're willing to die for it. Those people are the greatest threat to our authoritarian adversaries' regimes. The data is obvious. You look through Iranian history, it's these street movements that go into the public square, that when there's like sort of an uprising, this overthrows Iranian governments. It's also the reason why in the People's Republic of China, that the domestic security services inside China are 3 times larger than the People's Liberation Army. The budget is bigger, even though the Chinese are building an indigenous aircraft carrier and lots of other weapons. Beijing is so afraid of their own people, and that is why they're trying to make America more authoritarian, more like them, so their people will have no hope. And we spell this out with more detail inside our national security strategy. These brittle regimes, they fear their own people than the U.S. or the Western country, because the freedoms the U.S. has are a beacon of hope. They know that their only chance of long-term survival is to distinguish that hope. And to do that, they need Americans to lose faith in our government, in our most prominent institutions. Their theory of victory is that once we lose faith in our institutions, we will lose faith in democracy itself and embrace authoritarianism. Now, I painted a bleak picture of America today, but I actually think it's a very hopeful picture. And the reason why, maybe it has to do with my legal training as a constitutional lawyer. I had a wonderful experience some years ago to take a walk along the path in Princeton University campus with the late, great Professor Bernard Lewis, who explained to me that America's authoritarian adversaries have what he calls exoskeletons, whereas America, we have endoskeletons. And what he means by that, an exoskeleton is like, insects. They have their skeleton on the outside, but they're soft on the inside. So they have this brittle exterior. It's hard. But once you break through, it's soft, and in the case of our adversaries, rotten from within. We discovered that rot. The Soviet Union collapsed in '91. We're discovering that with Iran today. By the contrast, America is the opposite. We have this soft exterior, and you can poke and get into us. But once inside America, you hit a hard endoskeleton. And this is really perplexing for our adversaries. And what that endoskeleton is our constitutional order. It's a very flexible system. When it's working in practice, checks and balances. It's devoted to not to upholding an individual's power, but upholding the rule of law. This was no accident. Our endoskeleton was in place by design. At our founding, John Jay warned a young America that our openness to new immigrants and foreigners, as well as trusting national character, this was a great reason for our success. It reduced commercial transaction costs in ways that are unimaginable to other parts of the world. It also exposed America to great threats. Now, this endoskeleton has made America almost like magically creative, innovative, and powerful. We're the most prosperous civilization the world's ever known. And just when our enemies think they got us, we bankrupt them, or we overtake them by changing the rules of the game. A wise man who's actually sitting in the front row here, General Flynn, once told me when I was joining him to work at the NSC, Adam, we want to make sure that we have the greatest number of options at the very last minute. That was his writ to me. And that's what America has. Our constitutional order is remarkably flexible. It's regenerative. And frankly, one reason why I'm hopeful, despite all of this doom and gloom I've been talking about, is because when our enemies do attack us, when we have treasonous conspiracies afoot, the constitutional ordered process of the rule of law to sort that out, to expose it, as we're doing here, with our allies and partners, seated here today, is a regenerative process, and it's our opportunity now to demonstrate just how resilient we are. I will end my talks by talking briefly about part 3 of our national security strategy, which is about allies and partners, and this is where you come in. The problems I've been discussing that take place in America are maybe more extreme than anywhere in the world, but they're not relegated to us alone. A dear friend of mine, who was also the commander of British forces in Afghanistan, Richard Kemp, recently just wrote an article titled, "Putin's Spies Have Infiltrated Every Section of British Society." So this is a pervasive problem. This presents us an opportunity, and it's an offer that we are extending to you seated in this room, those listening, our allies and partners in the United States, to work with us together. This plague is infecting all of us, and but it presents us an opportunity to address this common threat together. I'll conclude by stating that next year is America's semi-quincentennial. As we argue in the national security strategy, we've succeeded this long because 250 years ago, our framers bequeathed to us a practical, wise, and elegant constitutional order. Respect for and adherence to the U.S. Constitution has kept Americans freer for longer than any other civilization in history. Something similar was said about the Roman Republic, but that was before the erosion of its republican principles and rule of law gave way to the law of the jungle. Hopelessly corrupt, weak, and despotic Rome, by then a rump of a once great power, was overrun by barbarian hordes, as American Ivy League campuses are today, and Rome collapsed. But what put the final nail in the coffin was when Rome's unprincipled leaders normalized what we see today, the commission of treasonous conspiracy. Writing over 2,000 years ago, Marcus Tullius Cicero explained why. A nation can survive its fools and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within. An enemy at the gates is less formidable, for he is known and carries his banner openly. But the traitor moves amongst those within the gate freely, his sly whispers rustling through all the alleys, heard in the very halls of government itself. We know what our enemies are trying to do. They're trying to do the same thing to you as well. Please join us in rooting out this rot and ending this evil and perpetuating all that is dear and important to us for future generations. Thank you very much.